Minister Wang Chen, Ambassador Zhao Jun, Professor Shai, Professor Gadi Ariev. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to address this symposium this evening on the Chinese, Israeli and world economies. And it's a special pleasure to be speaking after the very warm and very comprehensive speech of Minister Wang. What I want to do is talk mainly to an Israeli audience about the Chinese economy. I think most of you know a lot about the Israeli economy. I suspect the minister has been well briefed on the Israeli economy before coming, so I probably don't need to say very much about what's happened here. But just to say we have succeeded in overcoming the worst of the global crisis relatively well, with our financial system intact and with growth having been restored and with the impact of the crisis on unemployment being relatively small, though of course an unemployment rate of 8% is still too high. What I want to talk about mostly, though, is the Chinese economic miracle, which is the most impressive economic miracle in world economic history. In the period since 1980, which is roughly when the Chinese reform process that the minister referred to in his speech began, Chinese economy has grown at over 10% a year for 29 years. At 10% a year, you double your size every 7 years. So if you've done it for 29 years, you've grown by 2 to the 4th, which is a number which I'm sure you're all busy working out in your head. It's 16. So the Chinese economy today is 16 times larger than it was 29 years ago. And that's very hard to believe, except if you go to China and see what has been achieved there. When I was at the World Bank, visited China in 1988, and even in those 20 years, leaving aside the first doubling of Chinese GDP, even in those 20 years, the changes are just astonishing. This is the most rapid growth, certainly for the largest number of people, that has ever happened as far as we know. Currently, growth is continuing despite the crisis at about 8% a year. China believes that it needs a growth rate of 8% in order to keep the labor force employed as labor comes into the country, into the industrial sector from the agricultural sector. And it succeeded in doing that despite the global crisis. I'll explain how in a moment. China has a massive surplus in the balance of payments, $360 billion. That is double Israel's entire gross domestic product. That's just the surplus in Chinese exports. And China is now the world's largest exporter. It overtook Germany, which overtook the United States, but these relationships are a bit flexible. Inflation in China is negative at the moment, expected to be about -1% this year. And by almost all economic indicators, China is continuing to progress massively. China's GDP is the third largest in the world after the United States and Japan, measured in terms of purchasing power, that is in terms of what you can buy with what China produces. Chinese GDP is second largest in the world, something like 55% of the American purchasing power, GDP, which is also an extraordinary, unprecedented achievement in terms of the growth that has taken place. Long-term economic projections are very unreliable, but you can figure out if one country is growing at 10% and the other is growing at 3%, and one is currently the US economy is about 4 times the size of the Chinese economy. You can figure out that growing at 7% more than the United States, China will catch up reasonably quickly, but one really cannot rely on growth continuing at rates like this forever. Countries slow down as they get richer, and that will one day happen. How did China get out of this current crisis so well? In November 2008, the government of China announced a massive fiscal stimulus. The number is always given as $586 billion for Westerners, but the more convenient number is 4 trillion renminbi, which is what the stimulus package was. This totals over 10% of GDP. It's going largely into infrastructure, and Chinese infrastructure is in any case very impressive. And as a result of the massive investments that are now being made, China's economic infrastructure will be even more modern, even more advanced. The Chinese banking system has been used to finance quite a bit of this infrastructure, of this government expenditure. And the banking system is massive, plays a very complicated part in the economy. I worked once in Citigroup, and there were discussions of possibly helping manage one of the Chinese banks. When you figured out that they had 500,000 employees, the attraction of managing a bank with 500,000 employees by another bank that had 200,000 was less interesting than it seemed at first sight. The results of what China has done is, of course, to transform China's role in the world and to transform the lives of the Chinese people and to transform the global economy. We see that in many ways that China is now the main trading partner of many of the countries in the world as the largest exporter. We see that in the fact that the center of gravity of the global economy is moving steadily towards Asia. And with a combination of Japan, China, India, all in a very close area, and the countries of ASEAN, Southeast Asian countries, all very close together and cooperating and trading, the global economy will likely be dominated sometime in the future by the countries of Asia rather than by the countries of the West. Now, interestingly, this is a return to a situation that existed 200 years ago. But it's not a situation that we're used to thinking of as normal. 200 years ago, China and India had bigger economies than the UK or Western Europe or the United States. Then the Industrial Revolution happened in the West. It didn't happen for a variety of reasons in the East, but now it's happening, and it's happening at rates which are greater than anything ever seen. Now that the center of gravity of the world is moving, of the world economy is moving, the countries involved, the growing countries, want to take a larger role in running the world economy. And one result of this crisis has been to accelerate a process that started a few years ago. I worked in the IMF for 7 years between 1994 and 2001. At that stage, the G7, which consists of